I never thought it would come to this. Sitting in the stiff, cold courtroom, my manicured fingers gripping the wooden table before me, I struggled to keep my expression calm. I had prepared for this day, rehearsed my responses, refined my words. But no amount of practice could erase the tension that coiled in my stomach as I faced the man I had once called my husband, Ethan. He sat across from me at the defendant's table, silent as ever, his face an unreadable mask. That was his way. He never raised his voice, never fought back, never made a scene. Even when he found out about my affair, he barely reacted. He just packed his things and left, like the good, obedient workhorse he had always been. I had never loved him. That was the truth I had forced myself to accept. Ethan had always been reliable, predictable. He was the kind of man who worked tirelessly, who provided without question, who never once put himself first. First, I thought that was admirable. I thought I had married a man who would be my rock. But over the years I began to resent him. He was always working, always building, fixing, earning. I became just another part of his routine, another duty to check off the list. Our passion fizzled out before our second anniversary, and by our fifth I barely saw him as a man anymore. And then I met Ryan. Ryan was everything Ethan wasn't. He was confident, charismatic, exciting. He knew how to touch me, how to make me feel alive. Where Ethan's hands were rough from years of labor, Ryan's were smooth, practiced. Where Ethan grunted through conversations, Ryan made me laugh, made me want. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I had planned to keep my affair a secret. I had planned to be careful. But Ethan wasn't as stupid as I thought. He had known long before I confessed. He had seen the signs, the missed calls, the late nights. He had known I was cheating and had simply waited. The realization had enraged me. I wanted a reaction. I wanted him to yell, to break something, to fight for me. But he didn't. He just looked at me with those tired brown eyes and said, "I hope he was worth it." Then he packed his bags and left. Now, here we were, months later, sitting in court as our divorce proceedings played out before a judge. I wasn't worried. Ethan wasn't fighting me on the assets. He had built his construction company from the ground up, and by all rights, he should have been entitled to most of our shared wealth. But I had a good lawyer, no, an excellent one. And I knew Ethan. He would roll over just like he always did. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom as she reviewed the documents before her. My attorney, Miss Calloway, leaned toward me, whispering, "He hasn't contested anything yet." That's a good sign. I smirked. Of course he hadn't. I crossed my legs and glanced at Ethan, waiting for the inevitable moment when I would be declared the victor. But then, something unexpected happened. The judge turned to Ethan's lawyer. "Does the defendant have anything to say before we proceed?" His lawyer, a man I barely knew, merely nodded and gestured for Ethan to stand. I almost laughed. What could he possibly say? But then Ethan did something I never expected. He reached up, unbuttoned his crisp, gray dress shirt, and in one swift motion pulled it off. The entire courtroom gasped. I felt my breath hitch, my pulse quicken, as my eyes locked onto something I had never seen before. The scars. Deep, jagged scars carved across his broad chest, running down his arms, his torso. Some old, faded from time. Others fresher, still pink against his tanned skin. There were so many, like a brutal tapestry of pain and survival. This wasn't the body of the man I had married. The Ethan I knew was strong, but not this. This man standing before me, bare-chested in the courtroom, was something else entirely. He was a warrior forged in fire, in struggle. A murmur rippled through the room as people whispered to one another. Even the judge's composed expression wavered. I felt my face heat. What is this?" I stammered, unable to mask my shock. Ethan finally looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in years I realized I didn't know him at all. And that terrified me that I couldn't breathe. I had expected to win today. Expected Ethan to be the same quiet, passive man I had always known, predictable, reliable, weak. But as he stood there in front of me, shirtless in the courtroom, his body etched with scars I had never seen before, I realized something chilling. I had no idea who my husband really was. The whispers in the courtroom grew louder. Even the judge's gavel couldn't fully silence them. The air had shifted. This was no longer my victory lap. Ethan slowly, deliberately reached for his shirt and slipped it back on, buttoning it up as if he hadn't just shattered my perception of him in one motion. His lawyer remained silent, simply watching the room react to this sudden revelation. I could feel the eyes on me now, some judgmental, some pitying, as if I was the fool, as if I had betrayed someone important. I clenched my jaw. No, this doesn't change anything. The judge cleared her throat, her voice slightly strained as she spoke. Mr. Hayes, would you care to explain why you felt the need to, remove your shirt in my courtroom? Ethan settled into his seat, his face as unreadable as ever. Because she called me a workhorse, he said simply. Because she mocked me. His voice was calm, unwavering. Then he turned his eyes to me, and for the first time, I saw something I had never seen before, contempt. My stomach flipped. For years she looked at me like I was nothing but a tool, he continued, his voice steady. Like I existed only to make her life easier. Pay the bills. Keep the house running. Be there when it was convenient. She never asked about my past, never cared to know who I really was. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He wasn't wrong. I hadn't asked about his past. I hadn't cared to know. Ethan had always been solid, steady, uncomplicated, or so I thought. The judge sighed, regaining her composure. While I appreciate the theatrics, let's return to the matter at hand. She turned to my lawyer, who had been furiously scribbling notes. Miss Calloway, do you have any response? My lawyer hesitated before clearing her throat. Your Honor, while Mr. Hayes's scars are certainly dramatic, they are irrelevant to the division of assets and the matter of spousal support. Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. That's where you're wrong, he said, his voice razor-sharp. Because those scars? They're the reason she's sitting here, expecting half of everything I built. I blinked. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Ethan's expression didn't change. You want my money, Claire? Fine. Then you should know where it came from. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding. Ethan was always a hard worker. He had built his construction company from the ground up, poured every ounce of his time and energy into it. I had assumed he had been working since he was young, saving, climbing his way up. But now, I wasn't so sure. The judge folded her hands. Mr. Hayes, if there's something relevant you wish to state, now is the time. Ethan nodded, then turned his gaze back to me. I never told you what I did before I started my company, he said. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it, something dark lurking beneath the surface. I was a combat engineer in the military. 6 years, 3 deployments. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. My breath hitched. No, that wasn't possible. I stared at him, my mind racing. Ethan had never mentioned serving in the military. Not once. You're lying, I blurted out. He smirked. You think so? You never said anything, I stammered. Not once. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes cold. Because you never asked. The weight of his words settled over me like a crushing force. I had never asked. I had been married to a man for 10 years and never once questioned where he had come from, what had shaped him, why he never talked about his past. And now here I was, blindsided in a courtroom full of strangers. Ethan turned to the judge. I was given a disability payout when I was discharged, he continued. I used that money to start my business. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Everything I built came from me, from my sacrifices, from the injuries I sustained while serving this country. And now? She wants half. The murmurs returned, louder this time. I felt a flush of anger. I supported you, Ethan. I was there for you. His laugh was quiet but sharp. Really? He tilted his head, studying me. Because from where I'm sitting, all you ever did was take. I clenched my fists beneath the table. My lawyer placed a hand on my arm, silently telling me to calm down. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. You called me a workhorse, he said softly. Easy to ride. Easy to control. But here's the thing, Claire. He smirked, but there was no warmth in it. The moment you lost control, you had no idea what to do. My blood ran cold. I had walked into this courtroom expecting to leave victorious, to walk away with everything I wanted. But for the first time in my life I realized I had completely underestimated the man I had married. And I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. My hands trembled beneath the table, though I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattle. Ethan was lying. He had to be. This wasn't the man I married. My Ethan was a quiet, predictable builder. A man whose life revolved around his business. Not some soldier with a past riddled with war and scars. I wanted to call him out, to demand proof that he had ever set foot on a battlefield. But the moment I opened my mouth, I realized I had nothing. I didn't even know the name of the high school he went to, let alone anything about his past before we met. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, Ethan had never actually told me anything. I had assumed. I had filled in the blanks with what was convenient for me to believe. The judge glanced between us, her expression unreadable. Mr. Hayes, your military service is certainly commendable, but I fail to see how it pertains to the division of assets. Your wife has every right to seek an equitable share of the wealth accumulated during your marriage. Ethan's lawyer, a wiry man named Collins, gave a knowing smirk. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes's military background is crucial in this case. It not only explains the origin of his business, but also exposes the nature of his wife's financial demands. The judge sighed. Enlighten me. Ethan didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on me. When I left the military, I wasn't given a parade or a hero's welcome, he said. I was given two things. A check and a permanent reminder of what I sacrificed. He gestured vaguely at his chest, his scars hidden once more beneath his dress shirt. That check wasn't for my business, Claire. It was for my disability. I blinked. Disability? Ethan wasn't disabled. He worked 12-hour days, carried bags of cement on his shoulder like they weighed nothing, moved through life with an effortless strength that never wavered. You're not disabled, I snapped before I could stop myself. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You're right. Not in the way you think. But what do you know about post-traumatic stress, Claire? What do you know about nights spent awake because your mind still thinks you're in a war zone? About waking up in a cold sweat because the sound of fireworks outside reminds you of incoming mortar fire? My throat closed up. I didn't know. I had never known. Ethan turned to the judge. I didn't get out of the military because I wanted to. I was discharged after an IED took out my unit on a supply run. I survived. Barely. My back and ribs were shredded by shrapnel. I spent 6 months in rehab learning how to move properly again. I swallowed hard, my gaze flickering to his hands, resting on the table. The fingers that had built our home, our life. The fingers I had taken for granted. I received a payout, he continued. A one-time lump sum for my service and sacrifice. He smirked bitterly. That was the government's way of saying, thanks for your time. Good luck not drinking yourself to death like the rest of the broken veterans. The courtroom was silent. Even my lawyer had stopped taking notes. Ethan leaned forward. I took that money and did the only thing I knew how to do, work. I built something from it. Not for you, Claire. Not for anyone else. For me. For the guys who didn't make it back. I poured my blood and sweat into that company, because it was the only thing keeping me sane. His eyes locked onto mine. And you think you deserve half of that? My breath hitched. For the first time since these proceedings started, I was at a complete loss for words. Because he wasn't wrong. The realization burned through me, but I clenched my fists beneath the table. No, he doesn't get to make me feel guilty. He doesn't get to win. I forced myself to look up to regain my composure. That money might have started your business, but I was there, Ethan, I shot back. I supported you. I was your wife. His eyes darkened. You spent my money. I flinched. You sat at home while I worked 18-hour shifts, while I broke my back making sure you had everything you ever wanted. And when I came home exhausted, drained, with nothing left to give, you resented me for it. I shook my head. That's not fair. No. He tilted his head. Then tell me, Claire, how many times did you ask me about my past? How many times did you really care about what I went through? I opened my mouth, closed it. Nothing. Because I hadn't. And he knew it. The judge tapped her gavel twice, breaking the tension. That's enough, she said sternly. I will remind both parties that this is a legal proceeding, not a therapy session. She turned her sharp gaze to me. Mrs. Hayes, given this new information, do you still believe you are entitled to half of Mr. Hayes's company? I straightened. Of course. Regardless of how it started, the business grew during our marriage. That makes it marital property. Ethan's jaw clenched. I smirked internally. That's right, Ethan. No matter what sob story you tell, the law is still on my side. The judge turned to Collins. Mr. Hayes's counsel? Collins gave a slow, knowing smile. Your Honor, we'd like to present financial records showing that Mrs. Hayes withdrew significant amounts of money from the business account for personal use, including gifts for a certain Mr. Ryan Carter. My stomach dropped. No. My lawyer's head snapped to me, eyes wide. What the hell is he talking about? She hissed. Collins handed a thick manila folder to the judge. Detailed bank statements, Your Honor. Large purchases on luxury brands, high-end vacations, and even a $5,000 hotel reservation, booked under both Mrs. Hayes and Mr. Carter's names. I could feel the blood drain from my face. The judge flipped through the documents, her expression growing stonier by the second. Ethan sat back in his chair. His smirk slight but unmistakable. If she wants half, he said, his voice dripping with venom, she can explain to the court why she spent my money on another man. The courtroom gasped. And for the first time I realized Ethan hadn't come here to fight me. He had come here to ruin me. My world tilted. The courtroom was eerily silent, yet the weight of 100 stares crushed down on me, suffocating. My fingers clenched the hem of my blazer, nails digging into the fabric as my body refused to move, refused to react. I had prepared for this trial. I knew Ethan would be difficult, stubborn even, but I never expected him to be ruthless. This wasn't the quiet, predictable husband I had walked away from. This was a man who had come for blood. I turned sharply to my lawyer, but before I could speak, she hissed under her breath. Tell me you didn't do this. I swallowed. Lie. That was the first instinct. Deny. Pretend. Convince her it wasn't true. But even as the words formed in my head, I knew they wouldn't make it past my lips. Because the proof was right there in the judge's hands. Judge Holloway, a woman known for her composure, adjusted her reading glasses as she skimmed the bank statements Collins had handed over. Her expression remained unreadable, but the longer she looked, the heavier my dread became. Finally she looked up, her sharp gaze pinning me in place. Mrs. Hayes, she said coolly, would you care to explain these transactions? My throat felt raw, but I forced myself to lift my chin. I don't see how my personal expenses are relevant to the division of assets. Ethan scoffed. Personal expenses? Claire, you spent nearly 15 grand of my money on your boy toy. The murmurs in the courtroom flared again. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I shot him a glare. You owe me, Ethan. My voice was steady, but the edge of desperation was creeping in. I spent years of my life being your wife, waiting for you to be more than a paycheck with a heartbeat. His expression darkened. And while I was working my ass off, you were out sleeping in hotel rooms I paid for. I flinched. Judge Holloway tapped her gavel, though even she didn't seem able to fully settle the growing tension. Regardless of emotions, she said firmly, this is a financial matter. Mrs. Hayes, your argument is that you are entitled to half of Mr. Hayes's business because the company grew during your marriage, correct? I nodded stiffly. And yet, she continued, flipping through the paperwork, it appears you were using company funds for personal leisure, specifically for your relationship with another man. That complicates your claim. I clenched my jaw. I was his wife. Everything we had, everything he built was ours. Ethan's lawyer, Collins, spoke up smoothly. Your Honor, my client is willing to acknowledge Mrs. Hayes's role in his life, but we believe that her financial misconduct should factor into her claims. This isn't simply about a fair division. This is about betrayal. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Oh, give me a break. I turned to Ethan, my anger bubbling over. You want to talk about betrayal? What about all the nights you ignored me? The years I felt like I was invisible in my own home? You never made time for me. Ethan's expression didn't flicker. Because I was working. Oh, of course, I sneered. And what was I supposed to do? Sit at home and knit while waiting for my husband to remember I existed. His jaw tightened. You were supposed to be faithful. Silence. Thick. Crushing. Ethan wasn't yelling. He wasn't throwing accusations like I was. But the weight of his words, the sheer finality of them, cut through the air like a blade. My stomach twisted. I had expected anger. I had prepared for resentment. But what I hadn't expected, what terrified me, was the calm, cold man sitting across from me. Ethan wasn't just trying to win. He was making sure I lost. Judge Holloway finally let out a slow breath. This trial is about asset division, she reminded us, though even she sounded drained. Mrs. Hayes, I'm going to ask you again. Do you have an explanation for these transactions? I wanted to fight. I wanted to argue. But my lawyer was already shaking her head, the ghost of defeat in her eyes. What could I say? I spent his money on another man because I was bored? I cheated because my husband didn't give me enough attention? No argument, no excuse would make me look like anything but a gold-digging adulteress. And Ethan knew that. Finally, I inhaled sharply, forcing the anger down. I was entitled to that money, I said, though the conviction in my voice was weakening. I was his wife. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his lips curling in the faintest smirk. Not anymore. A chill ran down my spine. Judge Holloway tapped her gavel again, looking toward Collins. Given these financial discrepancies, what is Mr. Hayes proposing in terms of asset division? Collins slid another folder across the table. Your Honor, my client is willing to offer Mrs. Hayes a one-time lump sum. However, given her actions, we do not believe she is entitled to half of the company's worth. My pulse quickened. This wasn't right. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The judge opened the file and skimmed it. Her brows lifted slightly before she turned to me. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes is offering you a settlement of $75,000. I gasped. $75,000? That was nothing. Ethan's company was worth millions. My lawyer's expression hardened. Absolutely not, she snapped. That is an insult. Ethan cut in smoothly. Or we can fight it out in court, he said, tilting his head. And given the evidence of financial misconduct, your client might walk away with nothing. I felt the threat in his voice. My stomach churned as I realized exactly what was happening. Ethan knew I had no way out of this. If we fought, he would drag every bit of my personal expenses into the light. He would expose everything. I swallowed hard. I had come here expecting to take half of everything. Instead, I was being offered a fraction of what I had assumed was mine. And worst of all, Ethan was winning. Judge Holloway glanced at me. Mrs. Hayes, do you need a moment to confer with your lawyer? I didn't answer right away. Because for the first time since this trial started, I realized something. Ethan wasn't just the quiet, passive man I had underestimated. He was a man who had spent years letting me believe I had power over him. And now he was showing me just how wrong I had been. My pulse pounded in my ears. This couldn't be happening. I had walked into this courtroom expecting to leave with millions. I had assumed that Ethan would be the same predictable man he had always been, the one who never challenged me, never fought back. But now he sat across from me, completely composed, his offer of $75,000 hanging in the air like a slap to the face. I could feel the eyes of the entire courtroom pressing in on me. The judge, the attorneys, the spectators who had come for what they assumed would be just another mundane divorce case, only to find themselves spectators to my humiliation. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails biting into my palms. This wasn't fair. I had been his wife. For 10 years I had stood by his side while he built his damn company. Did he honestly think he could just walk away and lowball me like this? I turned sharply to my lawyer, but the look she gave me made my stomach drop. She was nervous, because she knew, if we rejected Ethan's offer, he would take this all the way to trial. And when that happened, my finances, my affair, every single transaction would be dissected in court. He would bury me. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. This is insulting, I hissed under my breath. My lawyer exhaled sharply, keeping her voice low. Claire, listen to me. You need to think this through. If we push, we could go to trial. But with those bank statements, there's a very real chance you'll walk away with nothing. I stiffened. You're supposed to be on my side. I am, she snapped. But I can't change the facts. The judge already sees you as the guilty party here. You don't have leverage anymore. I gritted my teeth. my entire body vibrating with frustration. I didn't want to accept this. I wanted to fight. I wanted to win. But for the first time in my life I realized I had no cards left to play. Ethan had outmaneuvered me completely. My gaze snapped back to him. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. No smirk. No gloating. Just quiet, unwavering certainty. He knew I had no choice. And he was enjoying this. My lawyer took a deep breath and turned to the judge. Your Honor, my client would like a brief recess to discuss. No. The word slipped from my lips before I could stop it. The room went still. My lawyer turned to me, eyes widening slightly. Claire. I straightened, summoning every last shred of pride I had left. I don't need a recess, I said coolly. I lifted my chin and met Ethan's gaze head-on. We reject his offer. For the first time all day, his expression flickered. A small shift in his eyes, like he had expected me to fold. Good. Let him be surprised. Judge Holloway let out a sigh, rubbing her temple. Very well. Since there is no agreement, we will proceed with formal hearings on the division of assets. I will schedule. Actually, Your Honor, Ethan's lawyer, Collins, interrupted smoothly. Given the financial misconduct we have presented, my client would like to file for malicious dissipation of marital funds. The room went silent. My breath caught. Excuse me. My lawyer's voice was sharp. Collins gestured to the documents. Mrs. Hayes used company funds for personal expenses, including those directly benefiting a third party. Under state law, that is considered marital waste. We believe my client is entitled to seek recovery of those funds before any division of assets occurs. I felt the blood drain from my face. Wait. I turned to my lawyer. What the hell does that mean? Her lips pressed into a thin line. It means, Claire, she exhaled, looking pale, that not only are you not getting half of Ethan's business, she swallowed hard, but there's a chance you'll owe him money instead. My heart slammed against my ribs. No. No. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood as the weight of the situation crashed down on me. I wasn't just losing. I was on the verge of owing my ex-husband money. Ethan's voice was quiet but lethal. You spent my money, Claire, he said. And now you're going to pay it back. The world around me spun. This wasn't happening. This wasn't. Judge Holloway nodded. Very well. The court will review this claim, and I will determine whether recovery of assets is necessary before ruling on division. I felt the shift in the courtroom, the murmur of voices, the silent judgment, the realization among everyone watching that I was no longer in control of this divorce. I had been outplayed. Ethan buttoned his suit jacket, straightening. Then he did something that made my stomach twist into knots. He leaned in slightly, just enough that only I could hear. Workhorse, huh? He murmured, his voice laced with quiet amusement. Funny. Now you're the one being ridden into the ground. I sucked in a sharp breath. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving me sitting there, drowning in my own defeat. I couldn't move. The courtroom buzzed around me, but the words barely registered. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, my nails digging into my palms as Ethan's words echoed in my head. Now you're the one being ridden into the ground. My stomach churned. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. I had walked in expecting to win. I had come here prepared to humiliate Ethan, to take what was owed to me, and now I was staring down the possibility of owing him money? No. This wasn't happening. I forced myself to swallow to keep my face composed. Stay calm, Claire. You can still turn this around. I turned sharply to my lawyer. Fix this. My voice was tight, barely controlled. I am not paying him a damn cent. She sighed, rubbing her temple like she already had a migraine. Claire, listen to me. The judge is considering Ethan's claim for malicious dissipation. If she rules in his favor, he'll not only keep everything, he could sue you to recover what you spent on Ryan. The name hit me like a slap. Ryan. All of it was because of him. The expensive hotels. The gifts. The weekend trips I told Ethan were girls' getaways. It had all been so easy when I was dipping into our accounts freely, spending without consequence. But I had never imagined Ethan would be smart enough to track every single dime, or that he would be cruel enough to use it against me. My lawyer leaned closer. Claire, you need to understand something. Right now, Ethan holds all the power. If this goes to trial, the court will dig into everything. They'll subpoena Ryan, pull up every bank statement, every charge, every lie you told. I bristled. You're my lawyer. Stop telling me what he can do, and tell me what I can do. She let out a slow breath, lowering her voice. You have two options. We can fight this and risk everything, or... She hesitated. Or what? I demanded. Or we go back to the settlement table and negotiate. The word sent ice through my veins. Negotiate? With Ethan? That was admitting defeat. That was letting him win. No. I wasn't going to crawl back to my ex-husband and beg him for a better deal. I straightened my shoulders, forcing steel into my spine. We fight. My lawyer's expression darkened. Claire. No, my voice was sharp. I deserved that money. She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. All right, she muttered. But you better be ready, because if we lose... She let the words hang in the air. I shoved my chair back and stood. My hands trembled as I grabbed my purse, but I masked it well, lifting my chin as I walked out of the courtroom. Ethan was in the hallway. He was leaning against the wall, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled up. He looked so relaxed, like none of this had affected him, like he had already won. His lawyer stood beside him, murmuring something I couldn't hear, but Ethan wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on me. And then, to my utter humiliation, he smirked. It was small, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. And it burned. I stormed past him, my heels clicking against the marble floor. I wouldn't let him see how much he had shaken me. I refused to let him think he had beaten me. But the moment I stepped outside the courthouse doors, the weight of reality hit me all over again. I had no control anymore. And Ethan knew it. I barely made it to my car before the weight of everything came crashing down on me. My hands trembled as I yanked open the door, threw myself inside and slammed it shut. The courthouse loomed behind me, cold and impersonal. A place where I had just lost complete control over my own future. I gripped the steering wheel, my nails digging into the leather. This was supposed to be easy. Ethan was supposed to be easy. He had always been the man who worked himself into the ground, never complained, never asked for more than what he was given. He was boring, predictable. A man who never demanded anything of me except to simply exist beside him. And yet, he had destroyed me today. My mind raced. I needed to find a way out of this. There had to be something I could use against him, something that would put the power back in my hands. I reached for my phone and dialed the only person who could fix this. Ryan. The phone rang. And rang. No answer. I gritted my teeth and redialed, anger bubbling beneath my skin. He had no right to ignore me, not after everything I had sacrificed for him. Finally, the call connected. Claire. Ryan's voice was cautious, uncertain. I didn't even give him a chance to speak. Did you see what Ethan pulled in court today? I snapped. He's trying to screw me, Ryan. He has bank statements. Receipts. Ryan sighed. Claire, I told you this was risky. I clenched my jaw. Oh, so now you care? Now you want to play it safe. There was a long pause. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. I need you to back me up. My voice was sharp, demanding. If they try to drag you into this, you deny everything. You understand me. Another pause. Longer this time. And then, Claire. I can't. I froze. The air in my car felt suffocating. What do you mean you can't? Ryan exhaled, his voice lower now. I have a career to think about. If this goes to court, they'll dig into me too. My job, my reputation. I can't afford that kind of scandal. I felt like I had been slapped. Oh, so you're just going to throw me under the bus? After everything I did for you? Silence. And that's when it hit me. Ryan had never been planning to stand by me. He had been perfectly fine enjoying the expensive hotels, the gifts, the lifestyle I had paid for. But now that things were falling apart, he was bailing. Just like that. I felt my stomach twist. I had risked everything for this man. My marriage, my finances, my future. And now when I needed him the most, he was already halfway out the door. You're a coward, I whispered. Ryan's voice was quiet, but there was no regret in it. I'm smart, he said. And if you were too, you'd take the deal. Rage burned through me as the call ended. Take the deal? Take Ethan's deal? No, never. I shoved my phone down and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My makeup was still flawless, my hair still perfectly styled, but for the first time I saw cracks. For the first time, I looked like someone who was losing, and I refused to accept that. Ethan might think he had me cornered, but I wasn't done yet. If he wanted a fight, I was going to give him one. That I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ryan was done with me. After everything I had sacrificed, after everything I had given him, he had turned his back on me without a second thought. And now I was on my own. I inhaled sharply, trying to steady my thoughts. No, I am not losing this. I refuse. Ethan thought he had backed me into a corner, but he had underestimated me. Again. I wasn't some obedient little housewife he could push aside. If he wanted a war, I'd give him one. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, searching for the one person who could still be useful to me. Margaret Holloway, the judge's niece. She and I had been friendly over the years, running in the same social circles. We had exchanged harmless gossip over brunches, laughed at mutual acquaintances who had gotten themselves into messy divorces. Now I needed her. I hit dial. Margaret picked up after a few rings. Claire. Her voice was hesitant, confused. I forced a bright, casual tone. Margaret, darling, it's been too long. How are you? A pause. I'm fine, she said cautiously. Everything okay? I laughed lightly, as if my world wasn't crumbling around me. Oh, everything's perfect, I lied. Just wanted to catch up. Maybe over lunch. There was another pause. Claire, her voice softened slightly. This wouldn't have anything to do with your divorce case, would it? My breath hitched, but I recovered quickly. What? Oh, don't be silly. I just realized how much I miss our little get-togethers. Margaret was silent for a beat. Then she sighed. Listen, Claire, my Aunt Judge Holloway? She takes her job very seriously. If you're calling me to try and influence her decision. Margaret, please? I interrupted, injecting just the right amount of hurt into my voice. I would never put you in that position. Silence. I could almost feel her uncertainty, the tiny bit of guilt I had planted. Finally she exhaled. I have to go, she murmured. And then the line went dead. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, my frustration boiling over. I had nothing. No support. No leverage. No backup plan. Ethan had ripped everything out from under me. For the first time a sliver of fear crept in. What if I really did lose? I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. I needed something big. Something that would shake Ethan's position and put me back in control. And suddenly it hit me. A slow, wicked smile spread across my lips. I still had one card left to play. A slow, twisted sense of satisfaction curled in my chest as my mind pieced together the plan. Ethan had blindsided me, humiliated me in court, and made me look like some gold-digging whore. He thought he had everything locked in, that I had no options left. But he forgot one thing. I knew him better than anyone. I knew his weaknesses, and I was about to exploit them. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a familiar name. Todd Marshall. A slimy divorce attorney known for dragging cases into the mud. The kind of man who didn't care about ethics, only about winning. I hit dial. It rang twice before his deep, smug voice answered. Claire Hayes. Finally seeing the light. I want to hire you, I said, getting straight to the point. Todd chuckled. I figured. Your case has been entertaining to watch. You do realize your current lawyer is playing defense, right? You need someone offensive. That's exactly what I wanted. I have something on Ethan, I said. Something that will turn this case around. Oh. His tone sharpened with interest. Go on. I exhaled, forcing my nerves down. Ethan's business? He had to have cut corners somewhere. Shady dealings. Under the table labor. Maybe even tax fraud. Todd let out a low whistle. That's dangerous territory, Claire. If you're wrong. I'm not wrong, I snapped. There's no way he built that company from nothing and stayed completely clean. I want you to dig. Find anything that will force him to settle on my terms. Todd was quiet for a moment, then said, Now this is the kind of fight I like. I could practically hear his grin. Fine, he said. I'll start digging. But if there's nothing to find, Claire, you're screwed. I tightened my grip on the phone. There's something. I said, more to convince myself than him. Because there had to be. I refused to believe Ethan was untouchable. I refused to let him walk away as the victor. I poured myself a glass of wine, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in my stomach. I should feel good about this. Todd was exactly the type of lawyer who could turn this case into a nightmare for Ethan. And if he found anything, even the smallest mistake, Ethan's perfect little empire would come crashing down. So why did I feel so unsettled? I took a sip, staring at the city lights outside my apartment window. Then my phone buzzed. Todd, you're going to want to see this. Meet me first thing in the morning. My heart pounded. Had he already found something? A slow smile curled my lips. It was time to turn this war around. Morning couldn't come fast enough. I barely slept, my mind racing with anticipation. This was it. My last card. If Todd had found something, anything, I could take control back from Ethan. I arrived at Todd Marshall's office 10 minutes early, my nerves vibrating under my skin. His firm was in a sleek, glass-paneled high-rise, a far cry from my current reality of fighting for scraps. A young receptionist led me inside, where Todd was already waiting, feet propped up on his desk, a cocky grin on his face. You look like a woman who's ready for blood, he mused. I sat down, crossing my legs. Tell me you found something. His grin widened as he tossed a thick folder onto the desk between us. Oh, I found something, he said, his voice practically purring with satisfaction. And you're gonna love it. I grabbed the folder and flipped it open, my breath catching as I scanned the documents. Bank statements, property records, business transactions. First it all looked clean. Too clean. But then I saw it. One name popping up where it shouldn't have. Jonathan Graham. I frowned. Who the hell is Jonathan Graham? Todd chuckled. Not who, Claire. What? He leaned forward, tapping the page. That's a shell company. And guess who it belongs to? A chill ran down my spine. Ethan. I whispered. Bingo. I stared at the documents, my pulse racing. What does this mean? Todd's smirk widened. It means your ex has been moving money around in a very interesting way. Offshore accounts, untraceable transactions, and best of all, undeclared assets. I felt my stomach twist in excitement. Ethan, Mr. Perfect, had been hiding money. Are you telling me he's committing tax fraud? Todd shrugged. I'm telling you that if the IRS saw these records, they'd have questions. A lot of questions. I let out a slow breath, my mind already spinning. This was my leverage. My way to destroy Ethan's smug confidence, to force him into my terms. I met Todd's gaze. So what's our move? His grin sharpened. We threaten him. We demand a renegotiation of the settlement, and spousal support. If he doesn't play ball, we let the court and maybe even the IRS take a very close look at his finances. A wicked thrill ran through me. I could already picture it. Ethan's smug face falling. His perfect little business collapsing under the weight of an investigation. I closed the folder, satisfaction humming through me. Do it. Todd nodded. I'll send the notice this afternoon. He'll have 24 hours to respond. I stood, smoothing down my blouse. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. Ethan thought he had me beat, but he had forgotten who he was dealing with. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.